Hello, everyone. Hello, and we are back with a new episode of APIM Hotrod. And today we are here with Geert, His Majesty Baeke. Hello, Geert. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Stefan?
Yes, fine. So happy to have Geert on this episode as the AI, indeed, one of the great AI voices in Belgium. So it's an
Exactly.
honor to have you with us today. So
Bye.
Massimo, we're going to talk about AI, right?
Yeah, exactly. I will not say. I mean, at least in my eyes, I will not only say in Belgium because Geert is a machine, literally a machine producing tons of high quality content in my eyes regarding AI and more generative AI and more. So today we will talk about AI architect and all of the challenges that we have in the today world. So here we have. As usual, your wonderful map, Stefan, that help us Azure architects, AI architect, Kubernetes architect, app architect to navigate into this big landscape. Today is AI. So let's start maybe with a very and a high level question that we can also use this map to navigate to different topics. But I was thinking, today, what for an AI architect or an Azure architect into generative AI kind of projects, what is the biggest challenge according to you, Geert?
Yeah. So to me, indeed, and thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's always great to be invited. So yeah, for me, it's not really the technical aspects, right? I mean, the technical aspects of Azure and all the different services, of course, they have their complexities, right? And you have to master them. You have to learn them. You have to find out about the tips and tricks and so on. So it's not. I'm not here saying that, oh, that's all very easy. Anyone can do it. You have to master it. But of course, when you go to customers which are facing a real like kind of business problem, the difficulty I think always in these kind of in building these AI systems is typically having to say, well, we'll see if we can solve your problem with this solution. Because often customers they come to us and they say, well, we have this kind of business problem, can be very diverse, can be really anything these days. We always say whenever you have some kind of process which involves like handling information, where humans typically have to look at information and do some action, we can actually use Gen AI to improve or make this process faster. Then the question is indeed, how do we do that in a very good way? And we can't really say for sure if it's going to go well or not, right? So we have to always come back with, well, we propose this kind of thing, and then we have to immediately go towards testing this solution from the beginning to see if this is really feasible or not. That's why we always stress indeed the fact that when we start these projects, technically, of course, we'll work all these things out, but we really need to stress, do you have the correct data? Do you have like golden data sets for me to test? If, for example, if it's a chatbot and you have to answer questions, do you have a good set of questions? Do you have a good set of context to answer those questions? And you have the good answers as well, right? And that we can start to do this kind of like evaluation cycle very early in the project. Now that's usually something other people do because I'm focused more on the technical aspects of building these solutions in Azure. I think that's more fun personally for me, but it's certainly not. I mean, it's that other part shouldn't be underestimated. It can be really difficult to know in advance, is this even going to work properly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, indeed, I think I also observed that I'm less, let's say, involved in pure AI projects than you were here, but I also see this, okay, building a POC and so on, that's easy, right?
Oh yeah.
Because then you focus on technical aspects, not too much the quality. You say, okay, anyway, we will improve, we will fix it. But actually, indeed, what you mentioned is very true. The data itself, right, is indeed very important. How you test it, indeed, and indeed, what is a good question, what is a good answer, and still a certain level of uncertainty anyway, right? Because even if you have
Oh
good
yeah,
data,
sure.
even if you have like good answers, still, you you will not always have the exact same behavior, even for the same question or task. See, I mean, there is a risk that at some point the Gen AI models might actually slightly deviate from what it does usually. You see, so that's also there is still this risk.
Absolutely, and we sometimes have like something that we notice sometimes in some projects. Well, the let's say the error margin is often made very, very small. You work with a customer, for example, and let's say it's about legal stuff or whatever. Say, well, when we ask a question, it has to be almost always 100% correct. That's very, very hard to do. I mean, in a POC, we can get to like maybe easily to 60% or something, right? 70%, or maybe even 75. It's great. But as usual, right? I mean, that getting to that close to 95, 96, even higher than that, can be really, really hard. And that's typically less technical stuff, really. It has to do with, okay, we have to deliver the correct data to the agent at the right time, so providing it with the correct context to answer this or that specific question. And what we often do, for example, is that we group these questions into different types of questions. And then depending on the type of question, we will use another kind of search strategy to deliver the context right in time for the agent to answer. And that kind of, let's say, that kind of work, well, for a more like technical person like me, is often not so interesting, but it's a really very important part of getting it to work properly, because that's a solution stands or falls with choosing the right approaches there. Because I often tell people, creating an agent is easy, and I often show them that it's like, here's a slide. To create an agent, it's one line of code, right? That's an agent. I have my agent, my LLM. I have my instructions. I have a set of tools I give to my agent. Well, that's it. That's an agent. But now it needs to really work properly in your context. That's something else.
Yeah, oh, indeed. In terms of code, because you mentioned code, so frameworks and so on. So, okay, on the market, you see more of I see more kind of people coming from a Python background with like LangChain, LangFuse, and so on. What I call the LangX, because there are plenty of them. But of course, Microsoft also has like Semantic Kernel and others. What do you see yourself? Of course, you're more involved in Microsoft, but do you still also see this, that, okay, it's not that easy to in the end align everyone, or, on which frameworks to use? And
no, it's certainly not. It's certainly not so easy. But what we see is actually we have a couple of, I work with developers that actually have their instinctual behaviors, a bit like, if I can do it without a framework, I will do it without a framework. Give me access to directly the OpenAI APIs, of course, through the SDK for whatever language that you want to do. And just let me create these applications just using let's say, the more lower level native API of the LLM provider. In our case, that's usually OpenAI models on Azure. So we typically don't go beyond that, because what I always say is also the model is really not that important. We talk a lot about models, but in fact, when you go to the big boys, it doesn't have to be Microsoft. They're all quite good. They're all quite good. But then developers often tell me, well, actually, if I can do it without a framework, that's fine by me. And then, of course, if it is a framework, then what I've seen most often is, of course, LangChain, because a lot of developers, of course, they have seen from the beginning, they saw this kind of framework and they have some experience with it. But then again, in a lot of projects, we can't say that we use LangChain always to the max or in depth. Sometimes it's just, for example, like to implement a text splitter, or to some simple tools that they provide. But we surely don't always use LangChain there. Now, sadly, we also don't use Microsoft that often in our field of work. There's a reason for that. As you said, a lot of developers are coming from this kind of Python background, and they're used to work with always these open source systems, typically not aligned with some kind of big vendor. And they pride themselves on that as well a bit, that they use those tools and not what the big vendor actually provides. Another reason is also that, I have to be honest here, that's maybe also the reason why I'm not an MVP anymore, but I didn't like Semantic Kernel, right? I didn't think it was any good. Our developers also thought that. But now we're actually looking at the Microsoft Agent Framework, and that's something else entirely, right? So now even our developers are looking and saying, well, actually, this might be the one coming from Microsoft that we are really going to invest in and see, can we use this or not in project with customers. And I've also seen that with customers who use semantic kernel today, or want to use, or who use them today, because for example, they do C# or they do Java even. We have customers who do Java and then they use semantic kernel in Java, and that's a great thing. And they also said, well, for us, I think where Microsoft is going here with that new agent framework, they really like it. They will, of course, hold off for it, I think, for another good 6 months to a year. They won't really start doing production stuff with it. But they surely are already starting to evaluate and to look closely what the Microsoft Agent Framework has to offer. And even one customer told me, well, you know what, there's no Java anymore there, but maybe we'll just switch to Python in that case, or C#. It doesn't matter. But the framework itself, really think that it's interesting. I also played it quite a lot already, and I must say I really like it. So finally, something great there. Yeah.
And one of the big things these days that is on these days, it's since let's say around 6 months is on the mouth of everyone is MCP. And I recently heard someone say, okay, now MCP is the standard. I will build an MCP for everything, on top of everything. And then people start scratching and say, okay, what my ears are hearing right now. And in one of your wonderful posts on LinkedIn, I think here I remember one of your sentences, and correct me if I'm wrong. And then you were stating something like, we don't always need an MCP. An MCP is when there is a need to, let's say, reuse that functionality or share that functionalities. I don't know if it was your sentence, but what is your opinion on MCP, when we should use it, or should we always build MCPs?
Yeah, well, the first thing I found, we had interesting conversations about this also with colleagues, and then we often have discussions also with customers. And sometimes I hear that people think that MCP, for some reason, makes agents work better in some way, because there's some kind of like hidden intelligence there that basically is going to improve your agent. Where of course, it's just an API that you call, right? And it's in fact, you have like, okay, it's becoming a protocol standard, and everybody is going to adhere to that kind of way of working, which has basically those kind of social implications from the fact that we all agree on using the same thing, is actually, I think, the more interesting thing than of course just having a new form of API that you call. And also what we tell our customers is indeed, don't build an MCP or don't build your tools, because that's of course the main thing they use it for. They want to give their agent tools, right? And instead of coding the tools in code directly in the agent code in process, you basically externalize those tools on an API. That's basically what you're doing with MCP. And we always say, if you're not going for tool reuse, if you don't have to reuse these tools, it doesn't make sense to create an MCP server that you have to deploy somewhere, you have to maintain it, you have to upgrade it. There is network connectivity involved, which of course can go wrong. So you have to think about, of course, what do we do at that level? You have to have high availability for your MCP server. That's not too difficult, of course, like container apps or Kubernetes or whatever you want to do. But in most cases, when you don't go for code for reuse for your tools, you can just code your tools in line, in your agent, in process, and follow best practices there. And I've even seen some developers just have some kind of like shared library or something that they import into their code, unless that is growing a bit too unwieldy. And then they start, of course, thinking, let's maybe go the MCP server anyway. But no, I don't think MCP is needed in all use cases. It is, of course,
might also be a question of scope, right? I mean, how big is the R agents that you are building? Of course, reuse there, but also how big. What are the scaling needs, right? Because of course, if you put everything in the same, it could have maybe scaling.
Of course. Yeah.
For me, that's actually even then one of the things that I noticed with let's say AI projects where I was involved. It's like often we don't have so much AI challenges, but more non-AI stuff. So scalability, that's one.
Yeah.
Security. So sometimes you see for RAGs, typically for RAGs, you have like, multiple data sources. One of them could be SharePoint, for instance, right? Where you have documents, but you have security trimming there. Then you start to say, okay, let's actually bring the data, have a search, right? Could be AI search, whatever, to basically crawl the data, and then let's talk to your data or chat to your data. But of course, then if you don't do anything, you just lose the security trimming that was in the original data source. You see what I mean? And so then anyone
absolutely,
use
absolutely.
your
Yeah.
chat.
And that
See,
that
that's
can
the
really
challenges that I see.
and that can really get kind of complicated, because actually I think I have a blog post about that as well, because a customer was actually facing that challenge where we decided to indeed say we're going to like implement a tool for our agent that is going to search in Azure AI Search, right? Do like a semantic query or hybrid query in Azure AI Search. Then of course the tool was actually running on an MCP server. So of course what we have to do in that case is, you first of all you have to authenticate to the front end where you basically interact with the agent. You have to pass your token in some way, of course, to the MCP server. Typically on the MCP server, the tool, especially for Azure AI Search, has to do an on behalf of flow, an OBO flow for Entra, to basically get an access token for Azure AI Search to use that new security trimming feature that's built into Azure AI Search. So of course, when you then tell the customer or engineers or people who have to implement this, they're going, whoa, wait a moment. What do we have to do here for like a simple search where you indeed say, where security is maintained, where you only have the access to documents that you are supposed to have access to. It's technically very complicated, and that's also one of the reasons we often say to our customers, or I tell people, it's like 95% software engineering in AI project, and it's like 5% AI in it.
Indeed, that's the.
And now that you mentioned OBO, so on behalf of security, as you said, or OBO is quite complex. And these days, Logic Apps, it became really, they did a lot of step into becoming more an AI platform where you can continuously use for enterprise integration as before, but also now you can use it on top of the classic integration as a sort of, as I was saying, AI platform. And in that case, they make it one click, that OBO integration.
It should be.
And then it takes away that pain of setting up, creating, and all of these kind of things, and maintaining those kind of connection. And it's a pretty, let's say, well-working move.
I think a lot of these kind of simplification. I mean, and there's a lot of simplification already, of course, within the Microsoft platform. For example, let's say if you look at Azure AI Foundry agents versus like the agents you build with like a framework, for example. Some things are indeed made easy, but there are lots of things indeed that are not easy at all. And I think the Logic App team is actually doing pretty well when it comes to building agents with Logic Apps and then using other agents from Logic Apps. It's often something that a lot of people actually don't know about. I've noticed in the field that is, what can you do with Logic Apps? You can build an agent in Logic Apps, really? It's actually funny that many people don't know about that.
It's surprising. Go ahead.
No, sorry, just because what was saying Geert, like sometimes they make it so simple that it's just like, no, I don't trust it. But like I saw, like if you want to implement A2A, you just drop protocol, let's call it protocol. You just drop one shape, and then you get automatically all of the contract, all of the different tasks implemented in seconds. It's really exhausting. So they're really, so 1 year ago we have a choice between a low code and a pro code. So pro code we have semantic kernel, LangChain or LangX, etc., LangGraph, whatever you want. And then we have or semantic kernel, and on the other side, like whatever low code. Today, Logic Apps is in the middle. Okay, it is not pro code, but it's not at all low code. It's really more complex, and it gives you access to a lot of flexibility, a lot of extensibility, right?
Yeah, it's actually great that you say that, because that's something we have also a lot of our customers are the same thing. They're saying, you know what, we're going to try and default building our agent like in a SaaS platform. For example, Microsoft, that means of course Microsoft the Copilot Studio. You can love it or hate it. I mean, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with it, but it's a great tool to build agents in a quick way, right? Of course, I'm more like in the professional pro developer field, and of course, you're always like, why can't I do this little thing here in Studio? It would have taken me 2 lines of code to do this, right? But it's a great tool nonetheless. And then indeed, on the other hand, people think, oh, then it has to be pro code. There's indeed this thing in the middle with logic apps, and I think even also things like Azure AI Foundry, agent service, and so on. Combination of those two can be actually, it's not low code, of course, but it's not as complicated as writing everything from scratch in something like semantic kernel. There's a lot of tools there that can help you in the middle between that SaaS and full pro code writing your agents using a framework.
Yeah, there is no one size fits all anyway. You see, that's a
No.
bit the thing. So it's not mutually exclusive. So yeah, I mean, that's the benefit. But I'm not surprised that okay, a lot of people don't know about logic apps, for instance, because as I said, there are so many moving parts, right? So many almost weekly changes
Yeah.
in all, that at some point, yeah, it's hard to keep track of everything. And then if you
Oh,
want to
absolutely.
focus at some point, dive a little more into one, then you lose track a bit of what's happening on the other side. By the way, Massimo, also we should mention a bit the AI gateway of APIM, right? So still, did you use that, Geert, so far in your projects?
Well, it's very surprising actually that I come across many customers. A lot of these customers aren't really small customers either, to be honest. And I see some API management, but not really at the level that I would expect. And then, of course, we often say, look, well, actually, if you're going for, let's say, a robust architecture, there's certainly a place to have something like APIM, let's say, in between the agent code and, of course, your models, your Azure OpenAI service, for instance, and other systems. So you can do indeed the throttling, load balancing, all that kind of stuff. Monitoring. I mean. That stuff, but actually it's not used that often. We often see it actually also as like a point solution, where of course we say, yeah, it's okay, of course, to have something like, let's say, a basic instance of APIM in front of this one single application that then only does work for this app. It's fine. It's not that expensive, really.
Yeah, no, indeed.
But of course, yeah, you don't want to end up with like 50 different APIM services for every application you have. Would be a bit silly. And so we're really trying to talk with customers and indeed think about, you should, if you're going really serious for Gen AI applications, this will not be the first one that you deploy. Will probably be different types of agents living in your organization. Then we always take APIM into consideration to basically control access to all those kind of models and basically have some kind of choke point in the middle, right?
But I also see it's a matter also is more a day two kind of component, in the sense like it brings more value when you scale your AI at enterprise level, right? So if you still are at the first use cases, you didn't, and those use cases, they still have to prove the value, because that's the value. At the end of the day, is not a technical thing. It's just like, does it deliver value, yes or no? That's what the business want, right? And only then you might have those scalability problem, like managed TPU and all of this kind of things. So I also just feel the same story that also Geert was saying.
And also what we see there is, of course, you have features in APIM like indeed load balancing, but in the end, we for most things that we build, we typically don't need those kind of features. For example, today, if you have like the correct enterprise licensing within Microsoft and you're using like the data zone across Europe, you often have in like a subscription, you have like 10 million tokens per minute quota and so on. So it's doing some form of load balancing across the EU, basically, to have your inference done. It's of course not the same. You don't have control over anything. You don't know what's happening, so there's no control. But for example, for performance or like load balancing perspective, we often in most things that we do today, we don't really need it. It would typically be other reasons, like giving certain teams access to your models and have some like quota limits on the team and stuff. That's of course something that would be more useful for many of our customers. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and other things that when I heard about token and things like this, one of the things that comes to my mind is memory management, the short-term memory, okay, and then long-term memory. Just like to give to the agent or to our intelligence the context, and all this context is growing and is growing and growing, and then there are different techniques, of course, in the LangChain that. They have LangMemo now. I don't recall how it's called. There are some libraries to move this. And is a problem? This short memory management is a problem that comes open to your projects, or is just like the default sliding window is something that works fine at least in the beginning of the adoption?
Yeah. Often that's not really something we really have to deal with. Of course, we have ways of like, let's say, saving conversation threads, making them like persistent and then reusing them, a bit like the thread concept in an Azure AI agent and so on, these kind of things. And of course, we have things, so we have certain projects where we think of, okay, when we want to keep like user preferences somewhere. So when we talk to the user, like in the chatbot interface, we know who the user is and we know some of its preferences. That's a bit like a form of long-term memory, but that's not really the issue for us. Indeed, the issue for us is usually, and it's like a fine art, is to get the right context into the context window of the model at the correct time. Yeah. So indeed, that's what I talked about in the beginning. When a customer says these are the typical, if it's a chatbot, of course, this is, and actually chatbots. People are saying, well, chatbot, well, it's very simple. That's like you have to think beyond chatbots. But these chatbots are among the most difficult things to implement and to get right. I mean, to me, basically, it's easier to implement an autonomous agent that works behind the scenes, that is going to implement some kind of business process. We have a good view on what the business process has to do, than to have we have a multitude of users asking a bunch of questions to a chatbot, and we need to ensure these questions are relevant and that the answers are relevant and correct. It's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And those are not agent problems. Those are like information retrieval problems.
Quality.
So it's the agent is not that important. The focus is indeed on how do I put context into that model's context window at the right time. And that's indeed the fact that we are saying, okay, we have to think about, and usually those kind of systems, people say we have like 2 terabytes or 5 terabytes of data on SharePoint over 10 years. And it could be indeed that some of the questions we need a document from all that time ago, and the answer is in that document, an old document from 10 years ago. That's really complex because you have to think about indeed what kind of questions do they ask, what are the groups of questions. And there are certain types of questions that, for example, typical hybrid searches don't do well. We often have customers that say like, okay, we have a question, give me the amount of countries in which we did a project, different countries. Yeah, that's something you cannot solve with a hybrid query. You have to have some kind of structured query, some kind of database behind that.
Yeah,
there's no way to solve that with hybrid queries. It sounds maybe logical to us, but it's not logical to people using these kind of systems. So we have to tell them as well, these are the types of questions you can ask. These are types of questions you cannot have answered properly unless we do something in the back end that we detect you're asking how many questions, then we're going to go to a system and count.
The appropriate tool to respond to this.
Yeah. And a lot of times we have to do this, like a lot of pre-processing of the data when we are taking all that content from years and years and years, the terabytes of data. We have to have really like huge pipelines to get the information out, to process the information, to get all the metadata from the document, maybe to even scan the document and extract metadata from the document itself. And we can then attach that metadata to something like an Azure AI search. So we can basically filter our result set beforehand. So we do actually a search in a much more smaller set of documents than this complete wide set of documents. And that kind of work, again, it's data level kind of work. It's data processing. Is the most of the work we have to do for those kinds of, let's say, the simple chatbots, but they are not that simple.
No.
Guys, we are almost at the end of this episode, so I would like, I have a last question. So I want to change a little bit the topic, so we stay in the AI things. But as the last question, I would like to know, ask to you, Geert, and also to you, Stefan, how did your development workflow or the way you develop change with Copilot agent, Copilot on your IDE, or whatever Gemini, whatever tool are you using? So how did it change? So you are using those tools in your IDE, or like me, I'm still a little bit old style and I prefer the agent in the cloud. I assign to him a task, I just do my stuff, and then we just reconcile at the end of the day. How do you work with AI?
Well, on my side, I use it daily, right? So I mean the Copilot, so Copilot, GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT. Because very useful. So of course I don't blindly trust what it tells me, right? Whatever the reason I use it for, because we also used it, of course, we knew, let's say, the life before having all these tools available, right? And sometimes I also just still use Google, right? I mean, because sometimes it just gives a more. Sometimes you can get in conversations with Copilot or GitHub or ChatGPT, whatever, where in the end you lose more time than sometimes just have a straight query where you actually find the right documentation about what you actually need to know. But though I use it daily on my site, mostly for questions I might have or whatever, or rephrasing some stuff, right? So really like, I know if I write a mail or something, or making presentation to C-levels, you see, someone's okay, do you have ideas on how it should be presented? And then, okay, I just do my shopping and take what makes sense, and then I just throw out what doesn't make sense to me.
And what about you, Geert?
Yeah, it's of course, very similar. I also, of course, use it daily. Copilot a bit less, but a lot of ChatGPT, and of course a lot of GitHub Copilot, and that's what I use mainly there. I'm not a developer. Of course, I do write code, but I always tell my colleagues the least amount of code from me in production. I think that's good. That's a great thing to do. But of course, yeah, you often have to write some code to validate a certain concept or to see will this work in some kind of way and so on. And yeah, I must say today I use GitHub Copilot typically with GPT-5 now today, because a lot of fuss as well about, GPT, is it better or not? Do you have to use something like Claude and so on? Yeah, okay. Sometimes I switch, but in a lot of cases I just use GPT-5, and that's actually fine for my needs, even for sometimes more complex code. And I also what I really love is now, of course, the integration with MCP servers, of course, and tools. I see that, for example, when I now write bicep code, for instance, which I still often write. In the past, it often was wrong, really wrong. And I really had to do a lot of troubleshooting to get it right. But now with like the Microsoft Docs, MCP, some kind of specific bicep MCPs as well. Context 7 as well as a tool. I mean, those kind of tools, really, they often have these question that I say, write this bicep for me based on the code you see that I've written. I need these and these and these services. Deploy them for me using private endpoints, and for now just in one VNet. Go. That it's just done in one step, and maybe a little retouches here and there, and it's done.
Yeah, no, indeed, that's indeed much better than before. So yeah, I also use it, of course, for code generation. So YAML, I mean, the AKS, or whatever. That's also very handy now. When we had to manually do all the YAML, make sure there is not indented and so on. So I think, for me, I'm using that daily.
I just as a small anecdote there, then we indeed can wrap up. But I've done a lot with AKS in the past, right? You know that I did a lot with AKS. Now with all of this AI stuff and many customers using container apps, it was a bit out of touch myself with AKS. But I had to do something for a customer. I had to do like a deployment with like Cert Manager, and then things like, for example, integration with DNS, automatic certificate management, Cert Manager, and so on, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't know this anymore. I mean, I don't have anything lying around there. I asked a question. I think after a few retouches, I had a prototype working to tell the customer this is how it could work in your case. I think I would have spent 2 days on that without AI. It was an hour and a half and it was done. I mean, it's because knowing these things from the past, of course, helps. If you don't know anything about Kubernetes, it will be not very useful.
Still a bit
But
hard,
I mean,
but yeah.
such a big difference.
It's really boosting productivity. So you just need to be able to still filter, right? But it really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, guys. We are at the end of our episode today. Thank you so much, Geert. Thank you so much, Stefan, for
My pleasure.
this lovely chat. And we could continue forever as usual, but we have to close. And thank you, everyone that is going to watch these episodes. And again, thank you, guys, again.
Thank you too. Thank you, Geert.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.